The collapse of the Soviet Union didn't begin with tanks or revolutions, but with a vision for reform. Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the USSR, introduced two bold policies: glasnost, openness, and perestroika, or restructuring. His intention was to modernize the Soviet system, make it more transparent and efficient, and to address the economic problems that had been festering for decades. Ironically, he was designed to save the system. Instead, he set off a chain reaction rapidly. Glasnost allowed him to speak. Suddenly, long-suppressed national identities and grievances erupted across the country. Perestroika exposed the economic decay that had been hidden behind propaganda and secrecy. The Soviet Union, once portrayed as a monolithic superpower, was revealed to be plagued by inefficiency and stagnation. Resources were funneled into the military and heavy industry, while the needs of ordinary people were often ignored. The system that was promised abundance delivered only scarcity. Gorbachev believed that a dose of openness and restructuring would breathe new life into the Soviet project. He imagined a modern, more humane social order that could lead to the Russian satisfaction. Glasnost, openness, was revolutionary. For decades, the Soviet system had lived behind a wall of sanctions where the party dictated what could be seen, heard, and even discussed. Suddenly, the rules changed almost overnight. In a country where the party controlled all information, the press was no longer just a mouthpiece. Newspapers began to revealing scandals that had been hidden. Television anchored debates about questions cabinet topics. imagined. The official story was no longer the only story. Independent newspapers and new voices flourished, offering perspectives never heard before. The public's new voice became impossible to silence. People spoke out, wrote, and organized. The system's foundation, control of information, crumbled, and with it, the old order began to fall. Perestroika, restructuring, was Gorbachev's attempt to revive the economy with market-like reforms. The command economy was a disaster: shortages, surpluses, and inefficiency. Factories got closed, and small private businesses were allowed. But the old system was dismantled. Managers were unprepared for competition. Bureaucracy stifled new businesses. The result was chaos. Goods vanished, inflation soared, and savings evaporated. The supply chain collapsed, and daily life became a struggle. Instead of revitalization, public anger, the system's collapse accelerated. Glasnost and perestroika, once hailed as bold reforms, collided to create a crisis that no one could ignore. Bare shelves in every store and a wave of open outrage sweeping across the country. The promise of a better life was replaced by the stark reality of scarcity, and the silence of the masses was shattered by the voice of demanding answers. The daily struggle for basics, bread, milk, even soap, became a public grievance that united millions. People wandered from store to store, hoping to find something, anything, to bring home to their families. The sense of frustration grew with every empty shelf. Queues for bread and soap stretched for blocks, becoming real humiliation and growing anger that people felt. Humor was a shield, but it couldn't hide the pain forever. Faith in the system eroded rapidly as strikes and protests spread from city to city. Workers who once believed in the promise of socialism now openly challenged the authorities, demanding change. Miners and industrial workers, the backbone of the Soviet economy, demanded not just better pay and working conditions, but real political change. Their voices grew louder, echoing through the streets and factories. The government, weak and uncertain, was forced to negotiate with groups it once controlled. The old order was slipping away, and the leadership struggled to keep up with the demands for reform. Protests were no longer just about food, they were about dignity, truth, and the right to whispered about the changes sweeping the nation. People wanted their freedom back. The desire for change was no longer hidden. It was written on every determined face in the crowd. Gorbachev's hope for dialogue and gradual reform was drowned out by a roar of anger and impatience. The people demanded more than promises. They wanted results. The state, once all-powerful, could no longer contain the unrest. Police struggled to keep order as protests signaling the loss of control. The empty shelves were more than just a sign of economic failure. They were proof that the ideology itself had failed. The public's patience, stretched to the breaking point, finally snapped. The system's legitimacy was gone, and with it, the last remnants of the old Soviet order began to crumble. As Moscow's grip weakened, nationalism surged in the republic. Glasnost allowed suppressed identities to resurface. The Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia led the way, demanding independence. The Baltic Way, a human chain across 3 countries, symbolized the Union's strength. Popular fronts evolved into pro-independence movements. Moscow's offers of autonomy came too late. The desire for self-determination overwhelmed economic unstoppable. By summer 1991, the USSR was on the brink, either a loose confederation or collapse. Hardliners in the party, KGB, and military staged a coup to stop Gorbachev's reforms. Tanks rolled into Moscow. Gorbachev was put under house arrest. But the public, led by Boris Yeltsin, resisted. Yeltsin's defiance on a tank became a symbol of change. The coup collapsed in 3 days. Soldiers refused to fire on citizens. The hardliners' attempt to save the USSR destroyed it instead. Gorbachev returned powerless. Yeltsin emerged as the new leader. The Communist Party and KGB were discredited. The last layer of the Soviet state crumbled. The end was now inevitable. After the failed coup, the USSR's collapse accelerated. Republics rushed to declare independence. Ukraine's referendum sealed the fate. On December 8, 1991, leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met in secret. They signed the Belovezh Accords, dissolving the USSR and creating the Commonwealth of Independent States. Gorbachev wasn't consulted. He learned of the end after the fact. The Soviet Union ended not with war, but with a pen stroke. The central government had lost all authority. The world watched as a superpower voted itself out of existence. The 74-year Soviet experiment was over. The leaders argued they were recognizing reality. The corpse of the USSR was finally buried. A new era began for its former republics. The global order was forever changed. The Soviet collapse was not an end, but a turbulent beginning for 15 new nations. The 1990s brought economic chaos, hyperinflation, and social upheaval. The old stability was replaced by uncertainty and hardship. The global balance of power shifted. America stood alone as superpower. The end of the Cold War redrew alliances and sparked new conflicts. Gorbachev's reforms meant to save the USSR accelerated its demise. The story is a warning about systems too rigid to adapt. The unintended consequences of reform changed the world. For some, it was liberation. The aftershocks of the Soviet collapse still shake. A single miscalculation can alter history's course forever.